This is my true story. My family abandoned me at the airport, so I boarded a first-class flight alone instead. The red glow of the departure board illuminated my face as I stood there, utterly alone. What I discovered in that terminal destroyed my life. Before that, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe to this channel so that my stories can reach more people. For decades, I played the role of the struggling father. When my wife passed, I made a choice. I wouldn't let my son, Leo, grow up entitled. I lived in a modest house, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and wore the same 3 sweaters every winter. I worked as a consultant, but Leo never asked what that actually meant. I paid for his college, his wedding, and the down payment on his house, always making it seem like I was scraping the bottom of my savings to do it. I wanted to know if he loved me for the man I was, or the bank account I held. The cracks started showing when Leo married Brenda. Suddenly I wasn't dad anymore. I was a handicap. Every Sunday dinner was filled with subtle jabs about my slow pace, or my outdated wardrobe. Their disdain wasn't just a dinner table habit anymore. It had become the permanent soundtrack of our relationship. By the time we were packing for our trip to Ohio, I realized I wasn't being taken along as a guest, but as a piece of baggage they were tired of carrying. I stood at the curb of Terminal 3, the humid air thick with the smell of jet fuel and impatience. My hand gripped the handle of my worn leather suitcase. It was heavy, not with clothes, but with the weight of 30 years of secrets. Beside me, my son Leo checked his expensive watch for the 3rd time in a minute. He didn't offer to take the bag. He didn't even look me in the eye. "Dad, you're moving like a snail," Leo snapped, his voice sharp enough to draw looks from passing travelers. "If we miss this flight to Ohio for Sarah's family reunion, I'm not paying for a rebook. Do you have any idea how much those tickets cost on short notice?" I watched a bead of sweat roll down his temple. He looked stressed, but it wasn't the stress of a hard-working man. It was the frantic energy of a man living on borrowed time and someone else's money. I kept my voice low and steady. "The airport is crowded, Leo. I'm doing my best." His wife, Brenda, didn't look up from her phone. Her thumb flicked across the screen with practiced indifference. "And why is this bag so heavy, anyway?" she asked, finally glancing at the scuffed leather. "It's probably full of useless junk from that dusty old house. We're already pushing the weight limit for the economy check-in. If they charge us an overage fee, that's coming out of your grocery budget for next month." I looked at the suitcase. Inside, tucked between layers of old flannel shirts, were gold bullion bars and the original deeds to the very office building where Leo pretended to be a CEO. They thought I was a penniless widower. They were charitably dragging along on a budget trip. They didn't realize they were currently standing next to the man who owned their lives. "It's just things I couldn't leave behind," I said quietly. "Memories, mostly." "Memories don't pay the bills, Dad," Leo grunted. He stepped closer, crowding my personal space. "In fact, your memories are starting to cost me a lot of energy. Try to keep up. We aren't your servants, and I'm not carrying you through the terminal, like a child." I felt a cold breeze settle in my chest. It wasn't the wind. It was the final cooling of my heart toward the boy I had raised. I had spent decades building an empire so he would never know want. I had spent the last 3 years living in a small apartment, pretending to be broke, just to see if he would still value the man who gave him life. The answer was standing right in front of me, checking his watch again. "I understand, Leo," I said. My voice was calm, the kind of calm that precedes a total collapse of a structure. "I'll try not to be a burden to you much longer." "Good," Brenda said, already walking toward the sliding glass doors, "because I'm not spending my vacation waiting for you to catch your breath. Move it." I gripped my suitcase tighter. The metal and gold inside shifted with a dull thud. I followed them into the terminal, watching their backs. They were walking away from the only person who kept them afloat, and they were doing it with a smile. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. The storm wasn't coming. I was the storm. The echo of Brenda's sharp command to move it was still vibrating in my ears as we entered the main concourse. The terminal was a hive of frantic energy, but I moved with a deliberate slowness that clearly grated on my son's nerves. The air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and the metallic tang of jet fuel. Brenda stopped near a row of plastic chairs and pointed toward a distant sign. "Go wash your face, Dad. You look haggard, and you're sweating. We don't need the gate agents thinking you're too sick to fly." "I'm a bit tired," I admitted. watching Leo's jaw tighten. The walk from the curb was long. "Just go," Leo snapped, checking his watch again. "We'll hold your bag right here. Don't take 20 minutes, or we're going to have a problem." I nodded and walked away without a word. I spent exactly 5 minutes in the restroom, splashing cold water on my face and staring at the man in the mirror. I didn't see a burden in that reflection. I saw a founder. When I walked back to the seating area, the chairs were empty. My heavy leather suitcase, the one they complained about, was gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find a text from Leo. "Looked for you everywhere. Boarding started early and we couldn't wait. We took your bag so it wouldn't get stolen. Just take the Greyhound bus back to the apartment. We'll talk when we're back. Don't be a burden, Dad." I looked at the gate. The jet bridge door was already closed. They hadn't looked for me. They had timed this perfectly to ditch me. I stood perfectly still while the crowd rushed past, a lone rock in a river of busy people. I wasn't panicked or breathless. I was simply disappointed. "So this is what 30 years of parenting buys me," I whispered to the empty air. "A bus ticket and a lie." I sat down on one of the cold metal benches. They thought they had my suitcase, but I knew better. They had the decoy bag I'd packed with old newspapers and bricks to test their greed. The real suitcase, the one with the gold and the deeds, was safely checked through a private courier service an hour ago. I reached into my hidden coat pocket and pulled out my wallet. From a secret slot, I withdrew a black titanium card. It felt heavy and cool against my palm. This card had no limit, just like my patience used to have no limit. I looked at the gate where my son had just abandoned me to save a few dollars and some extra baggage hassle. He wanted a life without the burden of his father. I decided right then to give him exactly what he asked for. "Excuse me," I said, stopping a passing terminal worker. "Where is the nearest lounge for Centurion members?" "Just past the duty-free shop, sir," the man said, eyeing my plain jacket with confusion. "Thank you," I replied. I stood up, my knees feeling stronger than they had in years. I wasn't heading for the bus station. I was heading for a new life, and the first thing I was going to cut was the dead. Weight currently flying toward Ohio. The cold weight of the titanium card in my hand was a grounding force as I turned my back on the gate, where Leo had abandoned me. I didn't head for the exit to find a dusty bus. Instead, I adjusted my collar and walked toward the polished wood of the Emirates first-class counter. The gate agent looked up, her eyes scanning my faded jacket and scuffed shoes, with a hint of professional pity. Before she could speak, I slid the black card across the marble. She looked down, and I watched the moment her entire demeanor shifted. The pity vanished, replaced by a rigid, respectful alertness. "How can I help you, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice dropping to a soft, reverent tone. "One way to the Maldives," I said. My voice was calm and resonant, the old authority of the boardroom returning to me like a familiar suit. "The Royal Suite, and I'll need a personal shopper to meet me at the lounge. My current luggage is no longer suitable." "Of course, sir." "Right away," she replied, her fingers flying across the keys. "That will be $18,000. Shall I use the primary account on file?" "Please do," I said. I took my boarding pass and walked toward the private elevator. Inside the lounge, the air was silent and smelled of fresh lilies. I chose a seat by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below me, on the tarmac, a small, cramped domestic jet began to taxi toward the runway. I knew Leo and Brenda were inside, likely congratulating themselves on how easily they had lost the old man. I watched the plane shrink into the distance. "Enjoy your budget reunion, Leo?" I whispered. "It's the last thing I'll ever pay for." I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. It picked up on the first ring. "Sterling?" Marcus's voice was sharp. My lawyer never wasted words. "I thought you were playing the role of the humble retiree for another year." "The experiment is over, Marcus," I said, watching the silver wing of Leo's plane disappear into the clouds. "The subjects failed the test." "I see," Marcus replied. I could hear the scratching of a pen. "What are your orders?" "It's time to move. Cut the allowance accounts, every single one. Brenda's shopping cards, Leo's marketing stipend, and the house maintenance fund. If their names are on my payroll as consultants, delete them by noon. I want their credit scores to feel the impact by the time they land." "That's a heavy blow, Arthur. They'll be stranded without a dime in Ohio. They told me to take a bus. Marcus, I think they can figure out how to do the same." "Understood," Marcus said. "I'll notify the bank immediately. Consider it done." I hung up and signaled a waiter. "A glass of your best vintage champagne, please," I said. As the bubbles hissed in the crystal glass, I felt a sense of clarity. For years I had enabled their greed, hoping that a spark of gratitude would emerge. I had built a bridge of gold for them to walk on, and they had used it to kick me into the water. Now the bridge was gone. I was no longer a father to be managed. I was a creditor to be feared. I leaned back, sipping the expensive wine, and began to plan my arrival in paradise. The bubbles in my glass danced toward the rim, a stark contrast to the stagnant air of the terminal I had just left behind. Below, the tarmac was a mosaic of gray concrete and rushing tugs, but from this height, the chaos looked small and insignificant. I was back in the world I had built, a world Leo and Brenda assumed had vanished with my retirement. I moved to a private booth as a waiter arrived with a plate of seared Wagyu beef. The aroma was rich, a far cry from the dry pretzels and cramped quarters my son was currently enduring in row 34. I picked up the silver fork, feeling its weight. For 3 years I had eaten cheap canned soup in a drafty apartment, just to blend into the background of their lives. I had played the ghost, hovering on the edges of their luxury, waiting for a sign of genuine love. "Is the steak to your liking, Mr. Sterling?" the waiter asked, bowing slightly. "It's perfect," I replied. "It tastes like clarity." He smiled, unaware of the war I had just declared. As he walked away, my mind drifted to the house they called home. It was a sprawling estate in my name, fueled by a maintenance fund that paid for their heated pool and Brenda's obsession with imported marble. I thought of Leo's marketing firm, a hollow shell of an office that produced nothing but invoices for me to pay. I had funded their delusions of grandeur, hoping they would use that security to become better people. Instead, they had become predators. A traveler at the next table, a man in a rumpled suit, caught my eye. "Headed somewhere for the holidays?" he asked, trying to be friendly. "I'm officiating a funeral," I told him, my voice flat and cold. The man blinked, his smile faltering. "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be," I said, taking a slow sip of the Cristal. "It was a long time coming. I'm burying a relationship that died from neglect." I pulled out my phone. The family group chat was quiet, likely because Leo and Brenda were busy celebrating their freedom from me. I held my glass against the window, the amber liquid glowing against the backdrop of the private jet terminal. I took a crisp, high-definition photo. The focus was sharp on the vintage label and the sparkling wing of a nearby Gulf Stream. I opened the chat and hit post. I didn't add a caption. I didn't need to. "There," I whispered, watching the upload bar complete. "A ghost's last meal." In 30 minutes, they would land for their layover. They would turn on their phones, expecting to see a desperate message from an old man at a bus station. Instead, they would see this. They would see that the burden they dropped at the curb was currently dining like a king. More importantly, they would see the first cracks in the golden floor I had built for them. I finished my steak with a calm, steady hand. I wasn't the victim in this story anymore. I was the architect of their consequences. The flight to the Maldives was a silent, luxurious blur, but the real movement was happening thousands of miles away on the ground. By the time my private speedboat cut through the glass-like turquoise waters toward my villa, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. The peace of the island was a sharp contrast to the digital storm brewing in my pocket. I stepped onto the wooden pier, my new leather sandals clicking softly against the grain. I reached into my pocket and switched my phone off airplane mode. It didn't just ring, it shrieked. A flood of notifications turned the screen into a frantic blur of red bubbles. First, a text from Brenda sent 3 hours ago. "Is this a joke? Where did you get that drink, Arthur? And why did my credit card just get declined at the rental car desk? We're stuck in the middle of the airport with 4 suitcases and no car. Call me now." I ignored it and kept walking. Then Leo's name flashed across the screen. I watched it vibrate in my palm as I entered the villa. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I sat on the edge of the infinity pool and listened to the message. "Dad? Dad, pick up." Leo's voice was high-pitched, stripping away his usual alpha facade. "There's a mistake at the bank. They're saying the Sterling Group accounts are frozen. The house taxes, the firm's payroll, everything is blocked. And Brenda is losing her mind because her platinum card was flagged as stolen." "Where are you?" "We're stranded in Ohio, Dad. This isn't funny." I took a slow breath of the salt air. I tapped out a short reply to the family chat. The bus was full. I decided to take a different route. Hope Ohio is gray and cold. It's 85 degrees here. The phone rang again instantly. This time I answered. Arthur? Brenda's voice came through, jagged and panicked. What is going on? We had to take a shuttle to a cheap motel because we couldn't even verify the reservation at the Hilton. Tell the bank to fix this. The bank didn't make a mistake, Brenda, I said. My voice was as calm as the ocean before me. I did. I made the mistake of thinking you were family instead of line items on a balance sheet. Dad, listen to me, Leo broke in, his voice muffled as if he'd grabbed the phone. We're sorry about the airport. It was a misunderstanding. We thought you'd be safer taking a bus than navigating the crowds. We were looking out for you. You didn't look back once, Leo, I replied. I watched you walk away. I watched you leave your burden behind. So I decided to do the same. I've lightened my load. You wanted me out of your way, and now I am. I'm exactly where I want to be. You can't just cut us off, Leo screamed. I have employees. I have a mortgage. No, Leo, I said, looking out at the endless blue horizon. I have employees. I have a mortgage. You just had a generous father. But that man stayed at Terminal 3. He's not coming to Ohio. I hung up before he could respond. The silence that followed was heavy and sweet. I looked at the phone and blocked their numbers for the night. They were finally experiencing the world without my protection, a world where actions had costs and baggage was never free. I stood up and walked toward the beach, leaving the noise behind. The salt air of the Maldives was a healing balm, a stark contrast to the suffocating entitlement that had defined my life for years. I spent the morning on the veranda of my villa, the laptop screen glowing with the cold, hard numbers of the Sterling estate. I was in the middle of a conference call with my estate managers when the first wave of true desperation hit my inbox. Sir, your son is currently at a main branch in Ohio, Marcus informed me, his voice coming through the speakers with professional detachment. He's making quite a scene. He's demanding access to the trust and claiming you've been kidnapped or coerced. I leaned back, watching a tropical bird land on the railing. Is he now? And what was the bank's response? They followed protocol, Arthur. Since I filed the revocation papers yesterday, they told him he has no standing. He's currently being escorted out by security. He's also trying to reach your personal cell from a dozen different numbers. Put him through on this line, Marcus, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I want to hear the sound of a man realizing the floor is gone. A few clicks later, Leo's voice exploded through the speakers, ragged and breathless. Dad! Finally! Marcus is telling me these insane lies. He says the Sterling Group has revoked my signatory power. We're stranded here. We can't even check into the hotel. And Brenda's jewelry was almost seized at the boutique because the card was flagged. What are you doing? I let the silence hang for a long moment, savoring the sound of his panicked breathing. I'm auditing my investments, Leo, I said finally, and I've realized that my most expensive asset has provided a 0% return on heart. What is that supposed to mean? Leo barked. This is business. You can't just shut down my life because you're throwing a tantrum about the airport. Leo, you told me not to be a burden, I replied, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. I'm just lightening your load. You don't have to worry about my slow pace anymore, because you're no longer following in my footsteps. I've realized that I wasn't raising a successor. I was feeding a parasite. And a parasite doesn't deserve a seat at the table once the host stops providing. I'm your only son, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Everything you built was for me. Everything I built was for a man who would respect the legacy, I corrected him. You aren't that man. You're just a boy who left his father at a terminal to save a few dollars. If you can't manage a suitcase, you certainly can't manage my empire. You're on your own now. Good luck with the bus ride home. Dad, wait, I signaled Marcus to cut the line. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked back at the screen at the millions of dollars that were no longer destined for a man who didn't care if I lived or died. The audit was complete. I had found the rot, and I had cut it out. I felt a strange sense of peace as I closed the laptop. The money was just paper and metal. The real power was knowing I finally had the courage to let him fail. The silence following the disconnected call with Leo was the most expensive sound I had ever bought. I spent the next 2 days watching the tide pull away from the shore, much like I was pulling the tide of my fortune away from my family. I had ignored 52 missed calls and a barrage of frantic emails. The alpha in me, the man who had built a shipping empire from a single truck, was now fully awake and unyielding. Finally, as the sun began to set on my third evening in paradise, I saw a FaceTime request from Brenda. I decided to answer. I wanted her to see the blue water. I wanted her to see what she had traded for a budget flight to Ohio. When the screen flickered to life, Brenda was crying. Her expensive makeup was smeared, and her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a mess. She was sitting in what looked like a cramped, dimly lit motel room. "Pop, please, you have to listen to us," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "We're so sorry. We didn't mean to leave you at the terminal. It was a misunderstanding, a total lapse in judgment. We were just so stressed about the reunion." I adjusted my camera so the white sand and the private waiter in the background were clearly visible. "Brenda, you told me I looked haggard," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "You told me my memories were junk and that I was a budget concern. Do I look like a budget concern to you now?" "No, Arthur, please," she pleaded, reaching toward the camera as if she could grab my hand. "We were wrong. We love you. We need you to come home and fix this. The bank won't even let us withdraw cash for food." "I'm sure the motel has a continental breakfast," I replied coldly. "I've decided to make some permanent changes. The house you're living in? The one with the Italian marble you insisted on? I've signed the listing agreement. It goes live tomorrow morning. You have 72 hours to vacate." The phone was suddenly ripped from her hands. Leo's face filled the screen, purple with rage and desperation. "You can't do this. That's my home. I'm your son, your only blood. You're going to make us homeless over a mistake at the airport?" "A son honors his father, Leo," I said, leaning back as the waiter set a fresh gin and tonic on my table. "A parasite just eats until the host is dead. I've realized that as long as I enable you, you'll never be a man. I'm not dead yet, and I'm certainly not finished." "You're a monster," Leo hissed, his eyes darting around the room in a panic. "No," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my drink. "I'm the man who paid for your shoes, your car, and your dignity. Since you threw mine away at Terminal 3, I'm simply taking yours back. You have 3 days. I suggest you start packing the junk you actually own. The rest belongs to the estate." I ended the call before he could scream again. I felt no guilt, only a profound sense of relief. The plea of a parasite is always loudest when the blood stops flowing. I watched the stars begin to poke through the velvet sky, knowing that for the first time in years, I was truly the master of my own house. The memory of Leo's purple, panicked face on the screen was still fresh in my mind as I boarded my return flight. I didn't go back to the cramped apartment I'd used as a front for my poverty. Instead, I went straight to the Lakeside Country Club. I knew exactly where Leo would be. He had scheduled a high-stakes business lunch to beg for investors to save his crumbling marketing firm. He thought he could still play the role of the successful heir if he talked fast enough. I walked through the heavy oak doors of the club, my presence drawing immediate attention. I wasn't wearing the dusty jacket from the terminal. I was draped in a bespoke charcoal Italian suit, my shoes polished to a mirror shine. The club manager, who had ignored me for 3 years, bowed his head. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling. It has been too long." "Indeed," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet dining room. I spotted Leo at a corner table, surrounded by 3 wealthy investors. He looked disheveled, his tie crooked, and his eyes bloodshot. He was mid-sentence, waving his hands frantically. "And with the new expansion, we expect a 30%. He stopped dead as he saw me. "Dad, you're here?" A flicker of hope crossed his face. He actually thought I had come to save him. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. "Gentlemen, this is my father, Arthur Sterling. He's here to confirm our liquidity." I walked to the head of the table, my shadow falling over his notes. The investors looked at me with newfound respect, sensing the shift in the room's gravity. I didn't sit down. I looked at Leo, then at the men he was trying to swindle. "I'm here to make a public announcement," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "The Sterling Foundation is officially withdrawing all support from Leo's ventures. Effective immediately, my son has no access to my capital, my name, or my credit." The room went deathly silent. One of the investors frowned. "Wait, Leo said the firm was backed by your personal guarantee, Arthur." "Leo lied," I replied, looking my son directly in the eyes. "My son is a man who abandons his elderly father at an airport terminal to save a $50 baggage fee. He thought I was a burden he could discard. Tell me, gentlemen, would you trust a man with your millions when he can't even be trusted with his own blood?" Leo's face turned a ghostly shade of white. "Dad, don't do this here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're ruining me." "You ruined yourself the moment you walked away from me at Terminal 3, I said. "I'm simply making the ledger public." The investors didn't wait for an explanation. They stood up in unison, tucking their folders away with looks of pure disgust. "We're out, Leo," the lead investor said. "Don't call us again." As they walked away, Leo slumped back into his chair, his world collapsing in a matter of seconds. I leaned over the table, my voice a cold whisper. "The mask is off, Leo. Now everyone sees you for exactly what you are." I turned and walked out, leaving him to pay a bill he could no longer afford. The stunned silence of the country club was still fresh in my mind as I pulled my car onto the gravel driveway of the mansion. The morning sun hit the white columns of the house, but it no longer looked like a home to me. It looked like an unpaid debt. A massive moving truck was already backed up to the front portico. Its ramp extended like a long silver tongue. Movers were hauling out Brenda's designer shoe racks and Leo's custom golf clubs. I stood by my car, arms crossed, watching the systematic dismantling of their borrowed life. Brenda was on the lawn, her face red from shouting at the men. When she saw me, she charged over, her voice a piercing shriek that echoed off the stone walls. "Where are we supposed to go, Arthur?" she screamed, gesturing wildly at the piles of boxes. "You're throwing us out like we're trash. We have nowhere to stay. No one will even rent to us because our credit is flagged." "There's a lovely boarding house near the downtown bus station," I said, my voice flat and cold. "It's cheap, clean, and the pace is just your speed. No extra baggage fees there." Leo emerged from the front door carrying a single suitcase, the same scuffed decoy bag they had stolen from me at the terminal. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumped as he approached me. The alpha posturing was gone, replaced by a hollow desperation. "How could you hide all this from us?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why the act? Why live in that dumpy apartment and pretend you were broke for years? Because I wanted to see who you were when I had nothing left to offer you," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I wanted to know if you loved your father or if you just loved his bank account. It turns out you're someone I don't want to know at all. You didn't just leave me at that terminal, Leo. You threw away the only man who would have died for you." "We made a mistake?" he yelled, his ego flaring up one last time. "One bad day shouldn't cost me my entire future." "It wasn't one bad day," I countered. It was 1,000 small cuts of disrespect that finally bled me dry. "You didn't fail a test of finance. You failed a test of character." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small yellow slip of paper. I held it out to him. He took it with trembling fingers, looking down at it. It was a one-way Greyhound bus ticket to Cincinnati. "I didn't lose you at the terminal, Leo," I said, turning toward my car. "You lost yourself. The house belongs to a family that actually appreciates it now. I suggest you get moving. The bus doesn't wait for anyone, and neither do I." I didn't look back as I drove away. Through the rear-view mirror, I saw Brenda sitting on a pile of luggage, sobbing into her hands, while Leo stood frozen on the lawn, holding the ticket to his new reality. I had spent my life building walls to protect them, but today I had finally torn the roof down so they could finally see the sky. The image of Leo standing frozen on that manicured lawn stayed with me for the first few miles, but by the time I hit the coastal highway, it began to fade. The weight of his entitlement and Brenda's greed had been a heavy anchor I'd dragged for far too long. Now the line was cut. I felt lighter than I had in decades. I pulled up to a small, quiet cottage nestled against a rocky cliff by the sea. This was the place I actually loved, a simple home with salt-stained shingles and a porch that faced the sunset. It was far from the mansions, the marble, and the hollow prestige of the city. I stepped out of the car, breathing in the sharp, clean scent of the ocean. I walked to the porch and sat in an old wooden rocker. I pulled my phone out one last time. I had a message from Marcus. "The trust for your grandson's education is finalized, Arthur. Leo and Brenda can't touch a cent of it. The rest of the estate has been transferred to the Legacy Home for the Aged." They were very grateful for the donation. "Good," I whispered to the wind. "At least someone will have a comfortable place to sit." I thought about the lesson I had learned at Terminal 3. Respect isn't something you can buy with a trust fund or secure with a deed. It is a currency of the soul. Enabling Leo's disrespect hadn't been an act of love. It had been a sin of convenience. By taking everything away, I had given him the only thing he truly needed, the chance to become a man on his own terms. A neighbor, an old fisherman named Elias, walked by with a net over his shoulder. He gave me a sharp nod. "Coming out on the boat tomorrow, Arthur? The tide's going to be just right." "I wouldn't miss it, Elias," I called back. He didn't know about the black card or the shipping empire. To him, I was just the man who knew how to tie a sturdy knot and keep his word. That was enough. I looked out at the horizon, where the orange sun was dipping into the dark blue water. True family isn't defined by blood or a shared last name. It's about the people who stay to help you carry the bag, when they think there's nothing but old flannel inside. It's about the people who don't see you as a burden, regardless of your pace. I reached over and turned my phone completely off. The digital world, with its frantic pleas and angry demands, went black. I leaned back in my chair and watched the stars begin to claim the sky. I wasn't a secret boss, a billionaire, or a burden anymore. I was just a man at peace on a quiet shore. If you loved my story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you have watched it from and what you would have done if you were in my place. This inspires us to share more such stories with you.